Men everywhere are trapped in cycles they don't even see coming. And the most dangerous part? Most don't realize it until the damage is already done. So let me ask you something directly. Are you letting someone exploit your worth without even realizing it? If that question hits a little too close to home, stay with me, because what you're about to hear might change everything you thought you knew. About relationships, picture this. A man stands in a hardware store, holding a toolbox he's lent out a dozen times. Each time it comes back more damaged, more worn, sometimes missing a piece altogether. But he still keeps handing it over because he believes that's what a good guy does: gives, fixes, provides. Yet he never stops to ask why nobody ever takes care of his tools the way he takes care of everyone else's. That man is more common than you think. Maybe that man is you. In relationships, men who don't understand their value often hand over their emotional energy, time, and loyalty the same way freely, unquestioningly, hoping it will earn them appreciation. But what happens when the giving becomes expected and the appreciation fades? What happens when the person you're giving to stops seeing your effort as a gift hand, starts seeing it as a baseline? There's a truth most men never confront until it's too late. If you don't know your worth, someone else will define it for you. And trust me, you won't like their definition. Let's talk about how it happens. It usually starts so softly you don't even recognize it as manipulation. In fact, it often feels like affection. A woman tells you, "You're the only one who really understands me," or "I don't know what I'd do without you." And because you were raised to provide, to protect, to be the emotional anchor, you step into that role without hesitation. It feels good at first, being needed, being valued. But that's exactly where the subtle shift begins. I knew a man who once told me about a woman he dated who constantly praised him. Compliments flowed like water. "You're amazing. You're so dependable. You always know what to do." But over time, those compliments turned into expectations. The praise faded, replaced with assumptions that he'd always be there, always fix, always give. What he thought he was offering out of kindness became her baseline for what he owed her. That's how subtle manipulation works. It doesn't arrive like a thunderstorm. It creeps in through small phrases, small favors, emotional moments where your empathy is used as leverage. Suddenly, you're rearranging your plans for her crises, paying for things she forgot her wallet for, or taking on her emotional burdens because no one else gets her. What you think you're giving freely is being taken as a guarantee. And here's the important part. This isn't always intentional on her end. Most women aren't sitting around plotting how to exploit men. Instead, these dynamics form because she senses your willingness to overgive, and humans naturally take what's consistently offered. The imbalance grows because you were taught that your role in relationships is to carry the weight without complaint. Meanwhile, she was taught that emotional expression is power. When she tears up, gets quiet, or hints she's disappointed, you feel compelled to fix it. You adjust your behavior to keep the peace. You give more than you should because you believe that's what a good man does. And little by little, your emotional and financial resources get drained, not through dramatic ultimatums, but through subtle cues disguised as connection. It's affection wrapped around expectation. And most men don't realize they've been caught up in it until they're already running on empty. But this is just the beginning of the cost. Let's look at what happens next when subtle manipulation turns into self-destruction. Ever feel like you're doing all the right things, but it still feels like it's never enough? That's the starting point of a slow, almost invisible erosion that happens when a man doesn't truly understand his value. It doesn't crash in all at once. It wears you down grain by grain, the way water hollows out stone over time. At first, you barely notice it because you think you're just being supportive, patient, or loyal. But the real cost of ignoring your value, it's a feeling you can't get back. It usually begins with small acts of self-sacrifice. You cancel plans to solve a problem for your partner. You stretch your budget to cover something that can't wait. You set aside your own stress because someone else's emotions seem bigger, louder, or more urgent. And each time you do it, you tell yourself it's temporary, that it's what a committed man does. But temporary effort has a way of becoming permanent obligation when no boundaries are in place. Before long, your identity becomes tied to how much you can give. Your worth starts to feel measured in how much you can fix, provide, or absorb. When your partner is happy, you feel like you've succeeded. When they're upset, you feel like you failed. You stop asking what you need because you're too busy trying to maintain the emotional ecosystem around you. And slowly, without realizing it, you begin to disappear inside the very role you thought would make you indispensable. I once spoke with a man who said he didn't recognize himself anymore. In the early days of his relationship, he felt confident and grounded. He cracked jokes, shared ideas, pursued hobbies, and felt like his partner genuinely appreciated him. But over time, the appreciation faded and the expectations grew. The same qualities that once drew admiration, his stability, his effort, his dependability, became things his partner barely noticed. He kept giving, thinking the old feelings would return if he just tried harder. They never did. Men in this situation often feel trapped. They stay because they've invested so much. They hope their consistency will eventually be acknowledged. They cling to the memory of how things used to feel, convinced that if they keep pushing, the relationship will return to what it was in the beginning. But what they don't see is how much of themselves they've given up in the process, how the pursuit of approval has stripped away their confidence and left them frustrated, resentful, and empty. And that's the quiet tragedy. The destruction doesn't happen in a dramatic moment. It happens slowly, silently, under the pressure of unspoken expectations and unbalanced emotional labor. By the time a man realizes what's been lost, he barely remembers what it feels like to value himself. But once you see the pattern, you can finally confront it. And that's where the turning point begins. Here's the hard truth most men never want to face. A lot of the exploitation you experience isn't happening to you. It's happening because of you. Not because you're weak, not because you're stupid, but because you've been conditioned your whole life to believe that love is something you earn through sacrifice. And that belief is exactly what keeps you trapped. I've seen men stay in relationships long after the joy, affection, and respect disappeared. They hold on because they're convinced things will get better. They tell themselves, she's just stressed, or it's just a phase, or once I fix this one issue, everything will go back to normal. They cling to old memories like life rafts, ignoring the reality of the present. One man told me he spent years walking on eggshells, trying to avoid conflict, trying to be more understanding, more patient, more accommodating. He believed that if he just worked harder, she would finally appreciate him again. But the more he gave, the less she valued him. And the less she valued him, the harder he tried. It was a cycle with no end point, only exhaustion. That's the trap. What you've been told. Work harder. Sacrifice more. Endure longer. What you need to realize, that's what's keeping you stuck. Most men think the solution is to double down on effort. They think being even more reliable, more generous, more forgiving will fix things. But that mindset is exactly why they fail to see the exploitation happening right in front of them. When you never say no, people stop recognizing your yes as meaningful. When you never set boundaries, people step over the invisible lines you wish they could see. The real issue isn't the woman's behavior. It's your inability to recognize when you're being taken advantage of. And if you don't see this for what it is, you'll keep repeating the same cycle with every woman you meet. Different faces, same dynamic. This is your wake-up call. Not to blame yourself, but to finally see the pattern clearly. Because once you acknowledge the truth, you can finally start breaking free from it. And that brings us to the real question. Why do men allow this to happen in the first place? Let's dig into that asterisk. The real reason most men fall into this trap isn't what you think. It's not a lack of effort. It's a lack of education on self-worth. Men don't wake up one day and decide to accept disrespect, overgive, or shrink themselves to keep a relationship alive. These patterns are planted early, reinforced constantly, and rarely questioned. And by the time you're an adult, they feel like the right thing to do, even when they're destroying you from the inside out. For most men, it starts in childhood. You're taught directly or indirectly that your value is tied to what you do, not who you are. Fix the problem. Be the rock. Don't complain. Don't burden anyone with your feelings. Put others first. And when you do, you're praised for it. You're seen as responsible, dependable, mature. But nobody teaches you where the line is. Nobody tells you that self-sacrifice without boundaries turns into self-erasure. Add to that the cultural script most of us grew up on. How many times have you seen a relationship play out like this in movies or TV shows? The hardworking man who proves his love by enduring disrespect, chasing approval, or winning her over through relentless effort. The message is subtle but powerful. If she's not happy, you didn't try hard enough. If the relationship fails, it's because you didn't provide enough, support enough, fix enough. And so men internalize a dangerous belief. If I give more, I'll finally be worthy. That belief is the root of the problem. It conditions you to equate self-worth with service. It trains you to tolerate situations that drain you emotionally and financially because you think endurance is noble. It teaches you to ignore your own discomfort, dismiss your own intuition, and stay silent even when something feels wrong. Then there's the emotional programming. Men aren't encouraged to think about their needs, let alone communicate them. Many don't even know what their boundaries are until someone crosses them, and by then, it's already too late. So when a relationship becomes unbalanced, they assume the issue is their lack of effort rather than the lack of reciprocity. Here's the part most men never consider. Exploitation doesn't require malicious intent. It only requires imbalance. When you consistently overextend yourself, any people, not just women, begin to rely on it. They assume it. They get comfortable with it. And because you never push back, they never adjust. This isn't your fault. You weren't taught how to value yourself. You weren't taught how to say no. You weren't taught that love isn't something you earn by bleeding yourself dry. But understanding the root of the issue is the first step toward changing it. Because once you realize why you've been allowing these patterns, you can finally do something about them. And that leads us straight to the moment. Every man eventually reaches the moment. Everything becomes clear. Let's talk about that wake-up call. This is the moment most men finally wake up. It doesn't come with fireworks or dramatic shouting matches. It usually hits in a quiet moment, when you catch yourself feeling empty after giving everything you had. When you realize the person you've been bending over backward for doesn't even notice the effort anymore. Or when you finally see how far you've drifted from the man you used to be. And once you see it, you'll never unsee it. For many men, the wake-up call feels like a sudden flash of clarity. One man told me it happened while he was sitting alone in his car after another argument he tried to smooth over. He looked at his own reflection in the side window and thought, "Why am I the only one fighting for this?" Another man said his moment came when he realized he was more anxious around his partner than relaxed, constantly adjusting himself to avoid disappointing someone who rarely adjusted for him. These moments hit hard because they reveal a truth you've been avoiding. You've been allowing the imbalance. Not intentionally, not knowingly, but through silence, overgiving, and fear of conflict. And when that realization lands, everything shifts. This is what people refer to as the red pill moment. Not about blaming or vilifying anyone, but about waking up to the dynamics you've been blind to. It's the moment a man chooses self-respect over people-pleasing. It's the moment he decides to set boundaries instead of hoping things magically change. And yes, it's the moment he realizes he does have a choice. I've seen men reclaim their value in powerful ways. One stopped always being the emotional fixer and started communicating his own needs. Another stopped apologizing for things he didn't do and watched as his confidence returned. Some relationships healed because of this shift. Others ended, but every man who reached this point agreed on one thing: clarity gave them their life back. And once you experience that clarity, the next step becomes obvious. It's time to reclaim your value. Let's break down how, if you want to break free, it's time to take action now. This is the stage where everything changes. Not because someone finally sees your worth, but because you do. You have the power to change the entire dynamic, starting today. Reclaiming your value isn't about becoming cold, distant, or guarded. It's about finally recognizing that your time, effort, and emotions are not infinite resources for others to drain. They're investments, and they deserve returns. So how do you rebuild your sense of worth after years, maybe decades of putting yourself last? Step 1. Set boundaries without apology. Boundaries aren't walls. They're filters. They don't keep people out. They keep the wrong behavior out. Start small. The next time someone asks you to drop what you're doing to help them, pause. Ask yourself, does this serve me or does this drain me? If the answer is drain, say no. Not maybe later, not I'll try. Just no. The first time will feel uncomfortable. The second time will feel powerful. Eventually, it will feel natural because it is your natural right. Step 2. Demand respect through your actions. Not arguments. You don't teach people how to treat you by lecturing them. You teach them by showing them what you will and won't tolerate. If someone consistently dismisses your feelings, distances themselves when you need support, or expects from you what they never give in return, stop rewarding that behavior with more effort. Respect grows when reciprocity becomes a requirement, not a request. Step 3. Prioritize yourself first. Not last for men who've spent a lifetime prioritizing others. This feels selfish at first, but it's actually the foundation of self-respect. Take care of your health. Reclaim your hobbies. Reinforce your career goals. Spend time with people who energize you instead of drain you. When you invest in yourself, you naturally become a man whose value is obvious, not because you shout it, but because you live it. Step 4. Stop settling for conditional appreciation. Many men stay in unbalanced relationships because they're afraid of being alone. But being alone is not the same as being lonely. In fact, you'll never feel more isolated than when you're giving everything to someone who gives nothing back. Remind yourself daily, connection without respect isn't love, it's dependency. You deserve more. Step 5. Celebrate small wins to rebuild confidence every time you honor your boundaries. Every time you choose yourself, every time you walk away from disrespect, that's a victory. Those small wins accumulate. That's how confidence is rebuilt. Not in one big moment, but in dozens of small, quiet decisions to stand up for yourself. Reclaiming your value doesn't happen overnight. But the shift begins the moment you decide that your needs matter. And once you make that decision, once you start living it, everything in your relationships begins to transform. Now that you've taken back your worth, the next step is shaping the kind of relationships that align with your new standard. Let's talk about the new paradigm you'll be stepping into. Imagine a relationship where your needs are just as important as hers. Not an afterthought, not something you squeeze in when everything else is done, but a core part of the dynamic. That's the new paradigm you step into when you reclaim your value. It's not about being dominant, cold, or unapproachable. It's about finally realizing that relationships built on imbalance will never bring you peace, while relationships built on mutual respect will transform your entire life. In the old mindset, you were taught to sacrifice endlessly, tolerate disrespect, and prove your worth through effort. You believed that if you carried the weight, things would eventually balance themselves out. But they never did, because imbalance doesn't correct itself. It grows. In the new mindset, you understand that boundaries don't push love away. They make genuine love possible. You understand that a woman who truly respects you doesn't want a man who disappears into service. She wants a man who stands firm in who he is. A man who values himself naturally attracts a partner who values him too. This isn't about changing women. It's about changing you, and everything will shift as a result. When you show up differently, the entire relational dynamic changes. Women respond differently. They invest more. They reciprocate more. They respect more, not out of fear, but because you've shown them the standard you live by. What you tolerate becomes your pattern. What you expect becomes your reality. And when you choose a reality where your emotional well-being matters, you create space for a relationship that's reciprocal, balanced, and fulfilling. Men who know their value don't chase validation. They don't cling to relationships that drain them. They don't settle for partnerships where only one person is being nourished. Instead, they choose intentionally, confidently, connections that align with who they are and what they deserve. And the beauty is this: once you step into this new paradigm, you don't go back. You don't let others dictate your worth. You define your standards, your expectations, And your boundaries, because now you know the truth. Real connection begins when you finally honor yourself. If there's one takeaway from everything we've discussed, it's this: knowing your value isn't optional, it's essential. Men who allow themselves to be exploited are not weak. They've simply never been taught how to protect their worth. Setting boundaries, prioritizing yourself, and refusing to tolerate disrespect are not acts of selfishness. They are acts of self-respect. Every small change you make today compounds over time. Saying no when it matters, demanding respect, and walking away from imbalance aren't just actions. They're statements that your value is non-negotiable. If you're not actively working on this, you're letting your value be defined by others. Stop giving away your power. Take control now. Your worth is non-negotiable. Share your experiences in the comments. Engage with others who are reclaiming their value, and take the next step toward the life and relationships you deserve. Change starts with one decision. Make it today.